Welcome to Discourse Politics, everybody. Today we will be talking about Biden being declared the winner, followed by Trump's lawsuits and what he's trying to accomplish. We'll go a little bit over electoral math, and then I will give you my opinion of percentage chance that Joe Biden and Donald Trump are the next president. So let's go ahead and get into it. Biden was declared the winner by the Associated Press and most of the mainstream media. And the reason is because he's currently projected to have 306 electoral votes. And I don't really know how to put this other than the media is ignoring any pathway for Donald Trump to become president. I think that's foolish in the sense that there is a pathway for Donald Trump to become president. The pathway may not be very good, but there is a pathway. So for them to kind of ignore Donald Trump's pathways, I think is very troublesome and foolish. If Donald Trump actually wins his lawsuits, there will be a lot of confused people because the media has basically spent the past 2 weeks saying that there's no pathway for Donald Trump to become president. Here's kind of what they're focusing on. So in the past 20 years, there's been about 5,778 statewide elections. Of those 5,778 elections, there have been a lot of recounts. The most votes that have changed in a recount of a statewide election was 900 votes. And if you're wondering, well, wasn't there just about 6,000 votes that were changed in Michigan? Technically, yes, but that was not due to a recount. That was due to finding a glitch, which my guess is if they actually did hand recounts, they would find a lot more glitches, but it remains to be seen whether they'll do a hand recount or not. But nonetheless, 900 votes during a recount was the largest vote change in a statewide recount. And of all the recounts that happened, of the 5,778 statewide elections, only 3 results have changed as a result of a recount. So the reason the media, I think, is so comfortable talking about the fact that Biden is going to win is because historically and in a historical context, there is very little chance for someone to win due to a recount, let alone the fact that they sort of need 3 recounts. And just sort of looking at the electoral math, as it sits right now, Biden is supposed to get 306. So at the very least, Donald Trump is going to have to flip 3 states, something like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and then he could get over 270. So by traditional mainstream media logic, it's basically he would need a minor miracle of epic proportions to happen. Now, the reason why I think all of this is crazy and that the media should at least be talking about this is because Trump has filed a lot of lawsuits and a lot of them have failed. But I created, to the best of my ability, a tracker, which I should probably have a title up here, but whatever. So this is a tracker of the lawsuits that I could find. And the truth is that it's really hard to piece all this together, mainly because most of the media is not talking about this at all, which I think is it's dangerous in my opinion. But nonetheless, the media is not talking about this at all. So it's actually really hard to piece any of this information together because usually you can look at, several articles and at least piece together some facts that they sprinkle throughout the articles, even if their conclusions are incorrect. A lot of times the mainstream media is good at digging up facts. They're really particularly good at digging up facts that support their narrative, but they do sprinkle in facts that you can use to assemble some sort of truth. In this case, they're barely focusing on this at all, which I find strange because, like I said, there is a pathway. So let's take a quick look. There's a lot of lawsuits in here, and there's a lot of lawsuits that sort of started around Election Day, started with the mail-in ballot, the counts of absentee ballots. So, in a lot of the states, the lawsuits centered around allowing poll watchers to meaningfully watch remaining mail-in ballots to be counted. And there were a lot of lawsuits that were thrown around. So there's a guy who does a YouTube channel. His name is Freedom Window. If you liked my spreadsheets during the election, you'll really like his stuff because he does a lot more in-depth stuff than I do. And it's really interesting. But anyway, historically, 6% of absentee ballots are denied. In this instance, something like 0.03%, a historical 5,000% difference between historically what happened and even what happened just months ago in the primary. So a lot of states had hundreds of thousands of disqualified ballots, hundreds of thousands of disqualified ballots. And this time you have thousands, if that. It sort of begs the question, why historically 6% and this time 0.03%? Why were people who were supposed to be watching this system, why were they kept so far back that they couldn't see signatures? The thing is when you look at all these lawsuits, PA Repubs request emergency order for late arriving ballots not to be counted. Supreme Court of the United States Justice Alito sent order to segregate ballots. The Secretary of State for Pennsylvania says that they already were segregating ballots. You can kind of see that there's a theme. And really what it comes down to is regardless of how some of these lawsuits have won and some of these lawsuits have lost. So basically each state follows sort of a 3-step method for what they are challenging in almost every state. And it is basically something along the lines of observers were not allowed to meaningfully watch. Number 2, that someone who did not have the authority to change the rules of the election changed the rules of the election. And therefore, since the rules were changed by someone that did not have the authority to change the rules, a lot of mail-in ballots are therefore null and void. So let's quickly go through each state and see what the legal argument basically is and why it may make its way to the Supreme Court. So in Pennsylvania specifically, they say through their lawsuits that observers were not allowed to meaningfully watch what was going on. Furthermore, that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court of the state of Pennsylvania changed the rules and deadlines by which something could be counted. Justice Alito told Pennsylvania to segregate the ballots, that since they didn't segregate the ballots, that a lot of those ballots are invalidated, the ones they didn't segregate, which would then render a lot of mail-in ballots null and void. On top of that, there's one extra layer in Pennsylvania that I've seen that I haven't seen in other states, and that is that they're alleging that there is a 2-tiered system in Pennsylvania, and Bush v. Gore in 2000 set the precedence that the reason the recount, which flipped the state of Florida from Bush to Gore, the reason it didn't count was because they were treating ballots differently. And what I mean by that is, one, they didn't do an entire state recount. What they ended up doing was recounts in certain counties that the Democrats wanted to recount. And then within those counties, they were looking at some ballots and they were making a determination because there was hanging chads, there was a butterfly ballot. What a butterfly ballot is that your first choice is on the left, your second choice is on the right, your third choice is on the left, your fourth choice is on the right. The problem with that is Bush and Gore were on the left side, and Bush was the first name, Gore was the third name. And what happened is people saw Bush and then they saw Gore and they thought Gore was the second choice. And so what happened was a lot of people unknowingly voted, allegedly, and looking at the statistics of it, it's probably the case that they meant to vote for Gore, but they ended up voting for this third-party candidate because they pushed the second button because they assumed the second button was for Gore when it was actually the third button that was for Gore. It was the stupidest way to have a ballot set up. But nonetheless, so they were trying to interpret ballots based upon how they think the person wanted to vote. What ended up happening is that the Supreme Court ruled that you can't do that because you're essentially treating votes differently within a state. So each state can do their own separate thing. That's within the Constitution. But you can't have some votes that are, counted one way and then another way where there's a council of people trying to figure out the intent of somebody's vote. And sometimes it goes one way and sometimes it goes another way. You can't do that. In other words, the Supreme Court ruled that was unfair to have votes being treated differently. Well, the same thing sort of happened in Pennsylvania. Trump, on 11/9/2020, Trump filed a lawsuit alleging 2-tiered voting system with Allegheny and Philadelphia County versus the rest of Pennsylvania. In specifically Allegheny County, which is where I believe Pittsburgh is, and Philadelphia County, which is where Philadelphia is, those two counties supposedly called voters and had them cure their ballots, cure meaning that there was some sort of error, and they had to fix that in order for their vote to be counted. Apparently in these two counties, which are heavily Democrat, they were calling up voters and asking them to cure their ballot. In no other county in Pennsylvania did they do that. So it's treating the votes differently according to the legal theory behind Trump's lawsuit. Some counties used authority that they did not have, which was to call voters to fix their ballots when no other county did that, because they actually don't have the authority to do that. It's incumbent upon each voter to follow up with their mail-in ballot to make sure it's counted. And they could see that if they actually checked, they could see that their ballot was rejected, and they could come in to cure that ballot or vote on election day. So it was incumbent upon each individual to do that themselves, yet the heavily Democratic counties took it upon themselves to call voters to cure their ballots. So that's an interesting legal argument that's happening in Pennsylvania. That's not necessarily happening in other states. And then sort of the objective is to invalidate mail-in ballots. So again, real quick, in Pennsylvania, it was the observers were not meaningfully allowed to watch. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court of the state made a rule change, which is unconstitutional, because only the legislature can make a rule change. And then they want to invalidate mail-in ballots because of the rule change, because of the two-tiered system that I mentioned, and because the observers were not allowed to meaningfully watch. So Georgia was interesting, and it was a little bit different. In Georgia, the Secretary of State was waiting for the legislature to make a change. And if I remember it correctly, and a lot of this info can be got by that YouTuber I was talking about earlier, a link in the description below, but here's the YouTube video. And in that YouTube video, he sort of goes through and outlines this way better than I'm going to summarize it. You know, you should check out that channel. It's pretty cool. And check out that video. It's pretty cool. The Secretary of State basically made a ruling that instead of waiting for the legislature to make up its mind on whether to send every registered voter a ballot or to require Georgians to request a ballot, because they were running out of time, the Secretary of State made a ruling that they were going to just go ahead and send out ballots to all registered voters, regardless of the legislature not enacting a law to allow that to happen, right? And I feel for this Secretary of State, because basically what he was saying was, as the legislature was fighting about this, he was running out of time to do it. So even if he waited for the legislature to make a decision, which I believe the legislature made no decision, if they had made a decision to send ballots to all registered voters, there would not have been enough time, because essentially you have to backwards plan, and there just wasn't enough time to do that. So the Secretary of State made an executive decision to send out ballots to all registered voters. Now that gets into, again, Article 2, Section 1. Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct, meaning that the exclusive power of how electors for the president, for the Electoral College are appointed is up to the legislature and only the legislature of an individual state. Because of that, the Secretary of State, and this is, again, legal footing, the Secretary of State had no legal authority to send ballots to every single registered voter, and therefore, because they circumvented the process of what the legislature had approved, that the mail-in ballots are void. So again, it's an interesting legal argument, and I really don't know how the Supreme Court is going to handle this, assuming it makes its way to the Supreme Court, because a traditionalist reading of the Constitution, which a traditionalist reading or a conservative reading, there's at least 5 judges out of 9 that very strictly interpret the Constitution. And the Constitution is very explicit about this, that only the legislature has the power. And you can't have secretaries of state changing and prescribing a new manner. Secretary of State made an executive decision to send mail-in ballots. Trump's team is saying that that is against the Constitution, and I can actually see the Supreme Court ruling in that way, because there are at least 5, maybe 6 judges who have a very conservative, very traditionalist view that the Constitution is codified as written, and if you interpret it as written, the Secretary of State has no authority to change the way in which electors of a state are elected. Finally, we sort of have Michigan of the states that I want to talk about, and there's a reason for that. It appears that in Michigan, they're claiming widespread problems with observers not being within seeing distance of mail-in ballots, particularly the beginning part where a ballot comes in and it has a signature, and a Republican observer, a Democrat observer, and the person counting the ballot have to all accept that the signature matches, and then that ballot is then put forward to be opened and viewed. Now, once that ballot is separated from that signature envelope, it's very hard to put that cat back in that bag. Well, what the Trump team is claiming is that when the word was put out that they were going to stop counting and Republican observers went home, then at 3 or 4 in the morning, a bunch of ballots appeared that were accepted without a Republican in the room. And the rule change of being allowed to do this in and of itself invalidates those ballots, because it has to be approved by people of both political parties, or at least that's what they're claiming legally. And therefore, hundreds of thousands of ballots, particularly, I think they said 450,000 ballots is what Rudy Giuliani said, needs to be thrown out because they were not observed by a Republican observer when they supposedly checked the envelope versus what was on file for that voter. So, and I might be mixing up my states, but this might be Michigan, so take this with a grain of salt. I think what was happening in Michigan too was that it was required to have a birth date, a signature, and I believe an address. And if it didn't have those things, that people who were counting ballots were allowed to change those and cure ballots. I believe that was Michigan. That might be another state, so take that with a grain of salt, which that in and of itself would also be a violation according to the Trump lawsuits. When you look at it, you have really those 3 states are where they're hitting hard, because the Secretary of State in Michigan and Georgia made rule changes which directly violate the Constitution, assuming, and this is one counter argument, assuming the legislature did not give these individuals authority somewhere else, meaning maybe there's some hidden emergency orders that the legislature gave the Secretary of State to make minor rule changes or something, right? If there's language in any of their laws that state that, I'm sure it's going to come out in the legal arguments that the Secretary of State had some leeway to make these changes, and therefore it is constitutional because the legislature delegated certain authority to the Secretary of State to make these changes. That's the most likely legal response from the Biden team, is going to be that there is some sort of extra authority that the Secretary of State was given by the legislature to make these rule changes. And then when it comes to Pennsylvania, though, I think Pennsylvania is by far the strongest Trump case. And that is because the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania had no authority to change the rules. Like, it is clearly a violation of everything we know about the court system and their relationship to the legislature and the executive branch of each state. They do not have the authority to make new laws, which is essentially what they did. Now, most of the time they're not called out for it, but there is now a clear conservative majority on the Supreme Court. And in my opinion, there is no way around this, that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court was extrajudicious and went outside the purview of the judicial branch. And I think that the Supreme Court is going to definitely slap that down. Now, the question is does that invalidate enough ballots to overturn Pennsylvania? I don't know. But I have a feeling that the Supreme Court wants to take this on because they want to make sure that state Supreme Courts don't do what the Pennsylvania Supreme Court did, which is change rules in the final hour. They want to probably set in stone that a Supreme Court of a state would not have the power to make these kind of changes. So I have a feeling that regardless of what happens, that the Trump campaign will be successful in this regard. How many votes does that invalidate? Does it change the election of Pennsylvania? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. The reason I talked about those 3 states is because those are the 3 states in which it's very clear what the goal is, which is that the Secretary of State or the Supreme Court of that state made rule changes without authority. Now, what that does to the Electoral College is if every single one of those suits is won and the number of ballots that they claim are going to be thrown out are thrown out, then what that does to the Electoral College is this. It makes it to where Trump wins an overwhelming number of what he needs to in order to win the election. He only needs 270 electors, right? So that's one way to do it. Now, there's also some things going on in Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada. He doesn't necessarily need Michigan. He could do Wisconsin. So he could do Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin. But I haven't really seen any good legal arguments for Wisconsin. But then again, because there's not much in the media about this, so it's really hard to piece this together. Maybe Arizona Maybe there's something in Arizona that they're trying that I don't know about. Maybe there's something in Nevada that they're trying that I don't know about. But nonetheless, this looks like the most likely avenue of approach is invalidating 450,000 votes in Michigan. Giuliani says upwards of 650,000 votes in Pennsylvania. And then you only need, 10 or 20,000 in Georgia. So basically getting mail-in ballots overall thrown out in Georgia would also accomplish the same goal. That is one legal way for Donald Trump to win. There is one other legal way that Donald Trump could also win that I think is even less likely than this, which this is not too likely, just to throw that out there. But one way he could win is this. He could say, for example, these states don't certify because there's legal challenges and the state legislature has to certify these, which, by the way, there's Republican state legislatures for all these states, including Wisconsin, Arizona, and I think Nevada. I know at least Arizona, I know at least these 5 states, they have Republican legislatures. So if there's some sort of combination where Donald Trump can stop these state legislatures from certifying electors, and on December 13th, when they have the Electoral College, if Biden does not get 270 electoral votes, then it goes to each state delegation in the House, and each state gets 1 vote. So the president would be elected by the House. Each state gets 1 vote, of which right now 26 states are controlled by Republican legislators, meaning that there's more Republican legislators from that state than Democrat. Only 22 states have more Republican or Democrats than Republicans in the House, and 2 states are deadlocked, meaning they have the exact same number. So if Donald Trump gets 26 states in the House to vote for him, then he becomes the president. Now, interestingly enough, the Senate, the same thing happens in the Senate, and the Senate gets to choose the vice president. So in theory, you could end up with a president of one party and a vice president of the other. It comes down to this. What do I think the odds of Donald Trump pulling off the legal victories? So flipping these 3 states here, or 3 states, he needs 3 states, bottom line, with Pennsylvania being one of them. So what are the odds? I'm only giving him about maybe a 5 or 10% chance of pulling that off. It's not a very good chance. It's like what I said the other day in the video where there were multiple states that if it looked like what it does now, if it looked like this, it would be extremely difficult for Donald Trump to do anything legally that would wipe out this lead. Now, one thing he is doing nationally, so he's calling into question the Dominion voting software. And, he had, I think her name was Powell, one of his lawyers. She was saying some pretty crazy things on any news channel that'll have her on. And I don't mean that she's crazy. I'm just saying that the things that she's saying, if they're true, are absolutely crazy. That the Dominion voting software is prone to having votes changed, that it's possible that the Dominion voting software was flipping votes. If those things are true, then it becomes much more likely that maybe Donald Trump doesn't flip these states, but they don't certify because the Dominion voting software, there's something wrong with it. If that's true, that there's something wrong with the software, I could see a situation where a lot of these states just don't certify. And if they don't certify, what ends up happening is the states that do certify, there's not going to be enough for either Joe Biden or Trump to get 270. And then it will go to the House of Representatives and the Senate, like I said, where each state gets 1 vote, not each representative gets 1 vote. So to get back to percentages, I give maybe a 5 or 10% chance that Donald Trump wins the legal battles in the Supreme Court that are eventually going to end up there. And he flips enough states to win 270. I give that maybe a 5 or 10% chance, only because I do think it would be epic. It would be totally epic if they have 100% bona fide evidence that the Dominion voting system was flipping votes for Joe Biden and that there was a compromise in the software or some sort of way that the system was compromised. I think that would be epic, but I think it's very, very unlikely. So I give that less than a 1% chance. But that's just my opinion. I have no idea. I'm waiting for the evidence. And the reason it took me so long to make this video is because I was waiting for the evidence of there being enough legal maneuvering that if Donald Trump wins the legal maneuvers, he would win the presidency. Well, with this Georgia lawsuit, I think now there's enough lawsuits there that there is a pathway for him to win if he wins these lawsuits. So if he wins the 3 lawsuits, particularly in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Georgia, in which the state Supreme Court or the Secretary of State of that state change rules, then I think that there is a pathway. So I think at the end of the day, it's really somewhere in the 5 to 10% range that Donald Trump pulls this off. I think that the odds of him pulling it off are just, they're not very good. I know Nate Silver's freaking out because the betting odds still have Donald Trump at like an 11% chance to win. And so he's freaking out every day on Twitter being like, how can people be so dumb? Well, the truth is Nate Silver, I just wish he had a little bit of skepticism. And that's all that I wish that he had, because he could say something like, I don't think it's 11%, but there is still a chance, right? No, he just comes out and says, you're an idiot. He literally basically says, you're an idiot if you believe that there is a high probability of Trump succeeding. And I think he's an idiot for saying that. That's just my opinion. Anyway, Biden is the projected winner, but Donald Trump is, there are still avenues in which Donald Trump could win. I don't think they're very likely, but there are very good legal grounds for which he could win. And I think it's dangerous that the media will not at least say what I said, which is that here is Donald Trump's alleged pathway for the best of my ability. I'm not a lawyer, but here's Donald Trump's alleged pathways. And this is how Donald Trump could possibly win. Because if Donald Trump pulls this off, then everybody's going to be like, I thought the election was over. The media called it. AP called it. They ran article after article that these lawsuits had no merit, that there was no way in which Donald Trump could win. Nate Silver was out there pontificating again that there was not a chance that Donald Trump could win. I think it's emotionally dangerous what the media does to people, which is to not outlay facts and say, here are the facts. This part is my opinion, the percentage chance that these things are going to happen, but here is what each side is trying to do. They have made the determination that Joe Biden is the winner and there's nothing else to look at. And that annoys me to no end, because there is something else to look at, because Donald Trump under no condition says he will concede. I don't even think he would concede if he loses his lawsuits. I think he'll leave the White House peacefully, but I don't think he's going to ever concede this election. And therefore, as long as he doesn't concede the election, there's still something to report on. And that report should be, here's Donald Trump's pathway to victory. It's simple. And even if they were to say, here's Donald Trump's pathway to victory, I don't think it's going to happen, but here it is. They should do that anyway. But, I digress. Asking for a media that, I don't know, put facts above their own opinion. But anyway, Biden is the projected winner. Donald Trump still has legal pathways. And here's what they are, and here's what I see from them. And remember, you can download this spreadsheet. It's not very good. It's not very informative, but if in case you want it, it will be in the public folder. Share this video with friends and family. Thank you for watching. Hit the thumbs up button. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next video. Thanks.